Hello, it's Anna and Sophie from Soundyard here. We make Chris Skinner's Countryside podcast, and we've got something very exciting to share with you. We have a new service that's being launched, and it's called Spoken Stories.
Spoken Stories is all about recording the voices and memories of your loved ones in outstanding quality, so they can be enjoyed for generations to come. For example, you know the story that Grandma tells that everyone in the family has heard before. Well, Spoken Stories is about getting those stories down and preserving them for your family history. Spoken Stories is about gifting someone the time to capture these personalities and unique voices.
We record your loved ones' tales, whether it's their whole life story so far or something more specific like a life-changing event. It is a gorgeous experience, and what you're left with is a beautiful monologue that really captures the essence of that person.
Think of it like an audio portrait, and take a listen to a snippet of this one from Diane's spoken story, recorded in her beautiful garden.
I was born in 1951 at Newmarket, and unfortunately I didn't see Mum for a year. I was looked after by a lovely nurse called Diane, my name, because my mum had TB when I was born. And so my mother never worked because with her problem with her, lungs, she had to go and have it sort of pumped up every so often. She used to do a lot of dressmaking, so she always made our clothes years ago. But yeah, she was a lovely mum, yeah, and Dad as well, yeah. That's very nice childhood I had, yeah, very nice. Yeah. I got married February the 16th, 1974. The weather was gorgeous. I ended up putting a big sort of T-shirt under my wedding dress I didn't need. I had a lovely one of those transparent umbrellas in case it rained, and it was just a beautiful day. I think I'm always sort of quite cheerful. I mean, if I go down the Luke and deliver some eggs to somebody, I'll meet somebody and chat, and then Paul say, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've been chatting to people." That's just my way. That's just how I am. We've always lived here. We had this built in 1974. They put the footings down in February and we moved in the August. Years ago, I used to go around the village on a bike, and when I had Ian, he'd sit on the back. We live in a lovely area. We've got lovely neighbours. They help us all out, which you all do with neighbours, and that's very, very nice. And as I said to Paul, I'm hoping we can keep this place on until, well, I don't want to move from here until I go out in a brown box. I hope that's not too soon.
If you'd like more information about Spoken Stories and to take advantage of our special introductory offer, you can head to www.soundyard.org/spoken stories.
And keep listening after this episode with Chris, and you'll hear another example of a spoken story. It's a view of the world from a 6-year-old.
Good morning, everybody. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and we're already past the middle of July. Goodness me, I just opened the farm workshop up, and at the end of the workshop is where the bantams sleep. 3 girls and 1 very young boy who's just decided that he can crow. But he's sitting there because it's quite gloomy at the moment, but normally about 4 in the morning he starts his crowing. He's kind of ruling the roost, I suppose you could say, and he's bossing these poor 3 girls around like this in a very inappropriate way. But if I just walk out of the way a little bit, he might do one of his early morning wake-up calls, and it is, despite his size, very, very loud indeed. Don't know, I'm just standing watching him now. Come on. Fancy having that outside your bedroom window. Well, fortunately, I can't hear him, and nobody else can either. That's such a lovely sort of evocative evocative sound of my childhood when there were lots of chickens wandering around the farmyard. Dairy cows mooing at this time of the morning. 4 o'clock's getting them in off the summer meadows where they spent the night outside eating the grass, and milking time would be just after 4 a.m. in the morning. And then there would be pigs here as well, and the young weaners, about 8 to 10 weeks old, were free range, particularly in the autumn. They'd go racing across the meadows under the oak trees and fatten up on the acorns, and that's how it was in the 1950s when I was a child. Now, I think that rooster's, what's he doing? Oh, they're all preening at the moment. I can just see them down at the end there. Anyway, Matthew Gudgeon will be along with me later on today, and we'll be looking at, well, all the exciting things, and I've had a whole host of questions. The office computer was purring away yesterday, spewing out one question after another, and I've had a quick look at some of them, and this week we got some fantastic questions, and one of them's on some of the balsam plants here at the farm as well. So we'll be visiting one of the wet areas on High Ash. I promise not to take Matthew Gudgeon to the bog anymore. It's a little bit hair-raising down there, but we'll be by one of the streams at the farm and answer as many of the questions as we can. Right, I'm just hopping off into the truck now. The sky's just beginning to get light now. All the security lighting's still on around the farmyard, and that will be turning off automatically quite shortly. The swallows are singing in the barn, nearly all of them on second broods now, so they've been busy. The weather's turned a little bit warmer, and we've got a few showers forecast later today. Still 2/3 of the hay to cut, so we're waiting for 5 dry days in succession so that we can get the rest of it into the barn for the horses here over the winter months. Right, I'm just going to start the truck, head down to one of the areas of woodland, because each of the 3 large areas of woodland here at the farm have young buzzards in them, and they're scooching from one tree to another. So I'm going to see if I can record, not that rooster, I'm going to see if I can record some of the young buzzards with their very high-pitched call. Mum, Dad, I'm hungry. Mum, Dad, I'm still hungry. and that's how it is. Nature at High Ash Farm. Oh, good. Rat's in the truck, waiting patiently. Good boy, Rat. You ready? It's 4:15 in the morning, and I've driven down to one of the areas of woodland at High Ash Farm, and there's a very large old sweet chestnut tree covered in ivy, and there's 2 young buzzards still in the nest. They're not out of bed yet, and they're just calling very quietly, unusual. Normally you can hear them half a mile away, but it's still the same kind of plaintive, high-pitched call. I think one of them is out to the nest and it's clambering round in the canopy, which is a little bit louder than the other one. There's 2 of them, and they're doing really well here at High Ash Farm. So I hope when Matthew arrives later today, we can get up face to face with one of them. They spend a lot of time feeding on the ground around the edges of the woodland, and there's lots of young rabbits, which is good hunting practice for them. But I'm only 10 yards from them. And so it's really quiet. It's a really plaintive call. But it's a call that's really suited to valleys, particularly in Wales, when the sound carries across from one side of the valley to the other. And now they've moved big time into the eastern counties. There's not a day goes past without me seeing at least 2 or 3 of them. I've got one in full view now, 20 feet from me, just walking around on an old dead branch, and there it goes. Very uncertain flight, taken off, just gone off through the woodland. Right, I know where they are. They're safe here at the farm, and let's hope they'll show up for Gudge when he comes along later.
Chris Skinner's Countryside Podcast with Matthew Gudgeon.
Well, surprisingly, Chris didn't ring me up at 4:15 in the morning to bring me along to hear the buzzards. But in fact, here at lunchtime, much more civilised time of the day, Chris, here we are, beautiful warm day, and we've just heard a buzzard.
Yes, I've brought you to one of the areas of woodland. This is 12 acres. It's at the bottom of the valley here. It's called Cantley Hill Plantation. And we've had 2 young buzzards hatch off. They were still in the nest just a day ago, and they've just learnt to fly, and they've come down to the other end of the wood. And we heard that really plaintive, high-pitched call. They were calling away, asking Mum and Dad incessantly for food. And they're one of the real success stories of birds in our country. They were really just confined to Wales and the valleys there. Sort of their call is designed to go right across the valleys. It's high-pitched and plaintive. For such a large bird of prey, you'd expect something different, and it almost sounds like a rusty gate hinge. And the numbers of either it's more enlightened gamekeeping, or whether the habitat has changed more and it's more habitat suitable for them in the eastern counties. But it's a real success story here, Matthew. So we've got 3 pairs of buzzards nesting, 2 pairs in woodlands at the farm, and 1 pair in a large old oak tree covered in ivy. And they've all been successful in bringing off, as far as I know, 2 youngsters each nest. So we'll be well provended with buzzards this year.
Well, we're off to a flying start, aren't we, here on the Countryside Podcast. You're very welcome. Thank you for logging on, tuning our way. Chris Skinner, Farmer Chris from High Ash Farm near Norwich. And we've got this wonderful, glorious time of year for a nature ramble around the square mile of Norfolk countryside, which Chris calls home.
Yes, I call that home, and I'm very spoilt and very appreciative of where I live. And I'm always busy, unlike those buzzards, which are called lazy hunters. And you can see there's venerable old oak trees down the side of this woodland. Some actually have got bare limbs on, and the buzzards just sit on there, the parents, and just wait for young rabbits to come out of the wood. And instead of sort of flying miles and miles up and down, they just swoop down and take a young rabbit and take it back to feed the youngsters. So that's why they're called lazy hunters. But they don't just eat rabbits. Quite a bit of their diet for most of the areas, things like worms and beetles. They are learning to follow the plough in Norfolk as well, which is quite a shock when you suddenly see a large brown bird with a 4-foot wingspan coming down in amongst the gulls behind the plough. And of course ploughing's much less prominent out in the countryside these days. many farmers, if they're not growing root crops, are using something called min-till, which is just tilling the soil perhaps 2 to 3 inches deep and popping the next succeeding crop into this slightly tilled soil. So lots of changes still happening in farming, and I'm looking around and still listening, because just as we arrived we heard that plaintive call. We're going to drive around this area of woodland. We might actually come face to face with one, and I was really close to one yesterday afternoon, just 20 feet away from me, and it seemed quite unaware that I was there, that I was a human and a possible threat, and it didn't kind of worry. Nothing gets disturbed here.
And for people wanting to spot buzzards and are not absolutely sure, the shape of the tail is quite a giveaway, isn't it?
Yes, with several species you can identify them by the shape of the wing in particular and the shape of the tail. With a red kite, it's a V-shaped tail, and a buzzard has got a nicely rounded tail. Really, sort of the colour isn't really a good guide with buzzards. One of the youngsters here is almost jet black plumage this year, with some sort of silver feathers underneath, but generally they're a mottled brown colour and quite well camouflaged, and they usually sit with a slightly hunched appearance, just waiting and waiting for prey to come their way. As I said, they're lazy hunters. So and we've come across lots of birds of prey here. On last week's on our way home, we didn't actually record it, we actually saw a marsh harrier hunting over one of the overwinter wild bird seed mix fields, which was a delight to see. But I'm also really conscious I've got lots of skylarks here, and it's this balance, because I have barn owls here, I also have harvest mice, and I love them both, but one will often eat the other, and you have to stand back and let nature do what nature does.
Well, that's what this podcast is all about. Hope you can stay with us for the whole thing, because Chris is going to guide us through, aren't you, on this very warm and humid day. Do you think the hay harvest is going to resume soon?
Well, I was all set to go yesterday, and then the forecast for the next day was some rain coming through, and if you want to make good hay you need 5 dry days, and that includes carting it frantically at the end. But we've got a question about hay on from one of our listeners, and we'll be answering that at the end of this session when we do listeners' questions, which I absolutely love, a whole variety of things to test me out.
Deep into the woods with the sun just dappling through the undergrowth here. Needless to say, Chris, and we're going to talk about trees?
Yes, just briefly. We had a really interesting question last week. It was from Susan Rudling, and asking about the oldest tree on the farm, which sadly met its demise about 2 to 3 years ago. It was the Chestnut oak.
Not many yards from here, actually.
No, that's right, very close, and it was over 600 years old. And it might surprise people, because there are other species, although the one we're standing there is an introduced species, probably been here since Roman times, is the sweet chestnut, and it can match, or almost match, oak for longevity. And this, the only way to describe it, is a massive tree, and it's just over 30 metres tall, which takes it to over 100 feet.
Ramrod straight.
Yes, a huge trunk, a huge bowl we call it, right up into the canopy. And it's, although we're standing under it at the minute, it's in full flower because it's unusual. Sweet chestnut, Castanea, Satvia. And it's interesting to know that the Roman people who occupied the west side of Highersham, the Romans came to Caister in AD 43, and they named Caister Castra, and it's almost the Roman town village that's named after sweet chestnut trees. And the Romans, we think, actually introduced chestnuts all over Europe, from Asia Minor and Yugoslavia and Greece, where its home is, and it will grow in our country quite well. You don't see quite so many of them in the northern part of the UK, but here there's no chalk just underneath where we're standing, and it suits the chestnuts, and we're surrounded by massive trees. Another one there, look, also over 30 metres tall. Another one there that's lost a big limb.
I know they're not strictly native, but we'd miss them, wouldn't we?
Oh, absolutely. And because we're losing so many of our native trees for various diseases, obviously through the first part of my farming career, elm disease, which is absolutely tragic. It killed over 1,500 trees here at the farm. Now we've got ash dieback, and of course it's high ash farm. Ash dieback was discovered not in the UK, not very far from here, Ashwellthorpe, and it's spread really all over the UK now. I visited Alderney a few years back and found it there. I was doing some talks for the Alderney Wildlife Trust, and so that's sort of decimating the ash population right across the UK. But this must be one of the largest chestnuts on high ash, and I brought a tape measure with me. Here we are. And what we're going to do, you measure the girth of a tree around about 5 feet above ground level. Well, I'm 5'8", which takes us to there, so we're going to put a tape measure around about there, but it's too big, so you've kind of got to go for a walk around the tree. I'll give you one end of the tape measure.
Right, here I go.
And round we go.
Right, I'm going round clockwise. Yep. Oh, there we are. And, oh my word, this is huge. Just go all the way round, and I've met Chris the other side.
There we go. What have we got? We have 14, 15 feet, almost exactly, just 4 inches short.
175 odd inches.
Yes, yep. Yeah, wow. So that takes it to probably close to 350 years old. And when you stand under it, you're just in awe because there are tons and tons and tons of timber there. Beautiful trees. And this one's unusual because normally with sweet chestnuts, the bark kind of twists in a spiral as it grows. And although it's a really useful wood and it can be used for fence posts and chestnut pale fencing, got lots of uses, it suffers from a condition called the shakes. I'm beginning to get that. So when you extract beams from it, they can split open, and it's really unfortunate how it happens. Each year's growth actually splits separate from the next one, and so you have all these little fissures in the wood, and that makes it pretty well unusable for really large scale timber. But all around us are chestnut trees. That one's been pollarded. You can see there's 2 coming off the base of the stump, and some through there have 3 or 4, and they're all giants in amongst all up over the 30-metre mark. And so wonderful trees, although as I said they're introduced species, we have fallen in love with them. I think the biggest one in the UK was at Canford School in Dorset, and that dwarfs this one. It's 28 feet 4 inches round the trunk.
Double.
Double, yes. So absolutely amazing girth. That's the largest girth, if it's still standing, of any tree in the UK. So chestnut sort of top trumps oak in that respect. But really lovely to have them here. All these were planted, not by the Romans, they're not old enough, but for all the timber that they provided. The farm was self-sufficient and could sort of mill its own timber for fencing in particular.
And as a byproduct, the chestnuts that these produce are great for the deer and all the different wildlife,
yes.
and the badgers nearby.
Yes, there's a badger set not far from where we are. It's in flower at the moment. As I said, it's one of the last trees to come into flower. You have these long catkins, 6-7 inches long, with lots and lots of pollen on, and the pollen sort of fills this area of woodland, particularly early in the morning, with a lovely kind of aromatic scent. It's almost musk-like, the scent, and at the end of all the little twigs where the catkins are on, you have these tiny little hedgehogs, miniature ones. And so when insects are sort of gathering the pollen from the sweet chestnut tree, it's insect pollinated as well as wind pollinated. You'll see lots of insects flying about up there in the canopy. And so what happens is then, once those little cupules, they're called, are fertilised, then they start to grow really quickly. So from now, sort of middle of, actually after the middle of July already, right through to early September, those little chestnuts, 3 in each little hedgehog case, grow up. They're usually flattened on one side where they're pressed against their mate inside the little things. Then they open up and either the whole hedgehog drops onto the woodland floor, and the badgers absolutely love it, and so do the deer. And of course, so did humans years ago. It was a major part of the diet, particularly for the Romans. So we have found at High Ash Farm, in the Roman excavations that we've done recently, we've found fragments of charcoal, which was from chestnuts, just to prove that the Romans actually used the wood as well as the food source. And isn't it strange, all these chestnuts beside us have got the lovely straight bark, and I was going to try and show you one with the corkscrew effect, and it's almost useless as timber at that point. But nevertheless, beautiful, beautiful trees. Big straight bowl on this one, right up to the dome at the top. And I don't know quite how they managed to produce all those chestnuts in the few weeks that they have left. Bear in mind, their home, they love growing in Greece and the hotter countries, and we still import lots of chestnuts for use over the Christmas period. And my job was to gather these in the autumn, keep them in sand, and make chestnut stuffing. That was my job. Getting very close to Christmas, and mash it up with butter and all sorts, and some salt. And my mum was a brilliant cook, and you learnt to do all those things just as normal in the farmhouse kitchen.
Well, this is Chris and Matthew reporting from underneath the spreading chestnut tree.
Exactly that.
Just taking a stroll along one of the horse rides here in the belt of woodland between 2 very large fields on High Ash Farm, Chris, and that's lovely with the sunshine coming through here, and I can see why the ladies on their horses really enjoy this.
Yes, these are old shooting rideways through all the woodlands at High Ash Farm. They were kept clear throughout the year, so no trees on them, and I've put a few jumps across. This one's a bit unusual. I think there's 25 large diameter tyres with a tree trunk through the middle of them, and that's one of the many horse jumps on the farm. They like a bit of variety. I think it's quite dangerous, but there we are. They go through here at a great rate of knots.
You could have the High Ash horse trials like badminton, couldn't
Yes. The horses are all guilty.
The horse trials, yeah.
Yes. Dear. So we've had a question, which is in the little farm truck, about balsam plants at the farm. And I mentioned Himalayan balsam in last week's podcast, and we had a question come in. Was I referring to a different species, which is Impatiens capensis, and that's the orange balsam? And it wasn't. I don't have that particular one at the farm. We have balsam poplars here, which is a completely different species. That's a species of tree, and it produces sort of a sticky substance, which is the bane of all beekeepers, because the bees will gather it. It's really aromatic. It's called propolis, and propolis comes from the Latin in front of the city, and the bees gather it and stick their combs together. So if you see this sort of brown substance on your bee combs, and that will come from the balsam poplar, something completely different. So these are the Impatiens species.
These ones in front of us here?
Yes, now.
Oh, where are the flowers?
Yes, well, let's walk on a little bit.
I'm used to the pinky sort of flowers on Himalayan
this
balsam.
is quite a scarce species. Here you are. Tiny yellow flowers. But you can see it looks exactly like the Himalayan balsam. They're also called touch-me-not, because if you choose a really large pod, and the pods are about 1 inch long, and just touch them, just give them a little squeeze. Let's see if we can find one for you. Try that one, Matthew. Just get hold of it. There.
Oh, yes, it jumps at you. I presume it pops, does it?
It pops. It's under tension, and all the balsam family will use these explosive pods to distribute the seeds. Now, interesting is this species of balsam It's called small balsam, is its proper English name. It's an introduced species, introduced about the same time as the Himalayan or the Indian balsam, around about the 1830s, so the middle of the 19th century. And it's taken over this whole area of woodland in the understory. It quite likes shade, and it has diminutive little yellow flowers. You can see some in flower over there. And a botanist came here a few weeks back, and he stood and looked at this, and his mouth was wide open. He said, I have never seen this particular plant in the UK before. He was astonished, but they will grow here, as you can see.
So however would it have spread here?
Yes, well, it's really interesting because balsam has a trick of getting its way all about, and Himalayan balsam, which we'll visit in a few minutes on one of the streams at the farm, is another example, because with Himalayan balsam growing on water, when the seeds pop, just as you just pop this small balsam pod, the seeds drop on the water. Now with both species, the small balsam and Himalayan balsam, the seed floats when it's dry and it goes downstream. But the question is, part of what you just asked, how does it get itself up the stream, or in this case, around about the Norfolk countryside? And the answer is in our local mammals, because when they go through, when this plant is completely ripe, and give it a nudge like that, oh, one just went off just then as spring-loaded seeds, and it lands on the back of the rabbits, the deer, the hares, and when they go through another area of woodland with the seed actually almost embedded in their fur, they give themselves a shake or a preen, and the seed will come off. And that's how the plant gets established in new locations.
These don't seem to be above waist height, do they? They're a bit smaller than the Himalayan balsam.
Yes, they certainly are. And nobody's actually, because it's quite a scarce plant, is taking the trouble to pull them all out and put them in heaps, because you don't want them to be there, because it is less invasive than the Himalayan or the Indian balsam.
Has this got a popular name?
Yes, it has got a popular name. It's just called small balsam. That is its English name. Yes, it has got it's called Impatiens pariflora. So that's the scientific name of it. But we're now going down to one of the streams at the farm and perhaps visit one of the most controversial plants here at High Ash, and that's the Himalayan balsam. And I can hear everybody groaning now, because we'll get the question out from the truck in a minute, that what we're being asked about, and why it's here at the farm. And I'll try and explain my thinking behind it. But just have another go. I think there's one perhaps here ready to go.
Oh.
Yes. It's quite a shock, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite a powerful sort of spring reaction. That's why part of the name of all of them is Touch Me Not. So there we, just because they explode, and children love popping the seeds, and you just start to learn about how different plants distribute their seeds in different ways. But there we are, that's a first for you, and for many people listening to this podcast, the small balsam.
We've driven a couple of minutes to another part of the farm, once again a wooded area, and now this balsam, Chris, as you've already alluded to, is 6 foot plus, isn't it, a lot of it, and much more colourful.
Yes, it's bright pink. Another name for it is policemen's helmets, and some people call it's already forming the seed on the pods here, and I'll do this one. Oh, it just makes you jump whether you want to or not. And this went off of the spring-loaded capsule. And this is the clever plant. It was first brought in about 1830 into the UK as a sort of specimen, and it was grown in greenhouses, and obviously it escaped. But it's managed to get its way up the river system, right through High Ash Farm, as far as this. We're standing by a stream here, just down at the bottom, and it's got itself upstream, which I find incredible. And there is a reason that it's here, but we've had a question about it.
Yes, hello, Jill Lilly, who lives very close by in Eton in Norwich, and regularly walks the Yare Valley, which I can testifies a lovely way of spending some time, and in a relatively built-up area, that's a real paradise. And Jules says, I heard you mention the Himalayan balsam on a previous podcast. So is this Impatiens capensis?
Impatiens capensis.
Impatiens.
Capensis.
You see, I didn't study any such
neither did
language.
I had to learn this the hard way by arguing my corner through life, and you just learn. There was a huge queen bumblebee, and this plant's got another name. It's called bee bums, because when the bees go into the flower,
There is.
all you can see is their bottoms.
Yeah.
And that's
there we are.
That's why it's called bee bums. Yeah, there it is. Well spotted. Yeah. So that's a buff-tailed bumblebee. So it's a plant that bees love, although we're in woodland. It's a plant that butterflies love as well. And there's masses of it here. It's doing really well. I respect it because it's gone upstream. Now, the surprising thing is, like many of our plants from millennia ago, this was a former resident in the United Kingdom way back millennia ago, 2 or 3 ice ages ago, and seams of this plant have been found close to Driffield in North Yorkshire in the coal, in the soft brown coal that they mine. It's an open mine, so but it has been here before, and many of our other species that became extinct in recent ice ages have also been reintroduced. Things like little owls, for instance, they became extinct. They didn't make it back once the North Sea formed. It didn't make it back across to re-inhabit the UK, although we got fossil records for them.
So this Himalayan balsam isn't really an invasive species at all?
No, not really, but the reason it's here is because of our modern way of living, and I've had to stand back. I've had lots of heated conversations with close friends about it, and we've all come to reach our particular viewpoint, and you either love it or you hate it. And I've stood back because it's doing something special. It's taking in carbon dioxide and it's giving out oxygen. And you know, we're felling the rainforests, and that sort of controls our climate somewhat. So these are fantastic plants. It's locking up carbon, so these huge plants weren't here in March and April, and all the local floras died down. The bluebells of the other side, they've all gone, and this amazing display has taken over. But it's what's interesting about it is what it's doing in the base of the stream down there. I don't know if we can part the vegetation, which is all Himalayan balsam.
It's actually got its feet in the water there, hasn't it?
Look, can you see down at the bottom of that one? The stalk is quite thick, and there's bright red roots coming down. It will root into water. If the seeds, which float, actually get caught up in little shallow mud, they will root, and some in there have got roots actually in the water, little rootlets going out. I can see them, bright red, just the same as you grow impatiens in the garden. If you grow busy lizzies, for instance, another close relation to this particular plant. So it's locking up carbon dioxide, producing oxygen, and of course if you just drive a car, or you know, when we breathe, we're using oxygen. It's a really precious gas that everything growing actually needs in our world. So it's doing something really important. But when it roots in these little fast flowing streams, you can see the water flowing past the plants down there. It's shallow, it's clear water, and it will slow up the water flow, and that's exactly what the Environment Agency want to help stop flooding. It actually, when you have these weather events and this stream becomes a coarse raging torrent down here, if we have these heavy thunderstorms as our weather pattern is changing, and it's because our weather's changing, it's having a huge effect on the flora and fauna. So I could spend, you know, there'd be 10 of us here pulling this lot, and it's a huge expenditure of energy, and yet we're pulling something out that's producing oxygen and locking up carbon dioxide. So that's why it's here.
And if you did try and remove it, ultimately it would be quite a futile attempt, really, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. It'd be back again next year.
It wouldn't be eradicated.
No, it wouldn't. But how it gets itself up these little tributaries off the River Tass, which is 3/4 of a mile away from where we're standing, and that's come up the River Yare. I've seen it at Surlingham, Bramerton, right through the Yare Valley system and up through the Wensum as well, and it then manages to get seeds on the back of our native mammals. They go upstream. Chinese water deer actually walk up these streams and obviously they have a seed pack on their back unwittingly and distribute the seeds upstream. So that's rather a long explanation for a very simple reason. Another bumblebee just going in just there. There it is. Now you can see it's called bee bums. Look, just see the bee's bum.
Bee's posterior sticking out.
And if you're up there a little bit taller than me, just where that bee's gone in, I'm not going to get it to squeeze the bee's bum, don't worry. There's a really nice capsule there. Would you like to just squeeze that one?
Oh yes, huge one there, look at that. Here we go. Oh no, it doesn't want to play ball.
That one didn't pop like the other. Oh, here's two more. Here's one that is ready, I think. Just try that one.
That one there. Oh,
yes, yes, it almost forces your fingers apart, the sort of little action. And the seeds, when they're ripe, are black and they float, which is absolutely amazing. Most seeds will sink. And there's the little coil mechanism after you've popped that one.
Oh, that's quite beautiful.
Little springs, aren't they? They really are exquisite. And there's another bee on there. That one's a buff-tailed bee. Look, just the back end of the bee. And how can you be cross about? And there's that's a little carder bee there, almost like a honeybee, covered in white pollen on its back, which made it look like a different species. There we are. Just have a listen.
The ducks at High Ash Farm going in to roost for an evening. Hey everyone, it's Matthew here, and if you've been enjoying our countryside podcasts, we've got a small favour to ask.
Yes, Matthew. What we're going to do is to ask for a small donation to help run the podcast, and any surplus goes for conservation at High Ash Farm here. And so it's really important. We both love to keep the podcast going, and that duck agrees with me, I think.
Well, it's straightforward to donate. You can make a one-off donation or set up a small monthly contribution, and the address is highashfarm.com/podcast.
We're hugely grateful for any support. It means we can keep sharing the stories of the countryside, which I love doing each week, but it's that small amount of costs we need to cover. So thank you very much in advance.
Well, the bees certainly enjoy it. Not all humans like Himalayan balsam, but we have someone who is, I think, willing to fight its corner here.
Yes, absolutely. I can't do what this plant is doing, and what this plant is doing, our planet needs.
Lots more emails this week. Rachel, who lives in South Norfolk, says, "My question is, where are the pollinators? I've seen numerous posts on social media citing a lack of pollinators over the summer. I've asked lots of folks and it's been noticed by all. The flowers are blooming, yet it's difficult to spot the pollinating insects, etc." Well, the weather hasn't been that great, has it?
No, and I think that's the entire reason this year. It was cold, wet and miserable right through early spring and into spring, when a lot of the insects actually build up their numbers. They weren't able to forage. Our beekeepers have had one or two flushes of pollen and nectar flow here at the farm, and the bees have eaten it all themselves because they aren't able to forage. And I've now got 20, 30 acres of specific midsummer pollen and nectar to come into flower. It will include things like teasels, some creeping thistle as well, which is a real favourite of peacock butterflies, and occasionally you'll have painted ladies on them as well. They're not that's just a species of butterfly, don't get worried about painted ladies. And sometimes clouded yellows will come in. We had quite a flush a few years ago. The wind's in the south at the moment, and that can bring some of our migrant species of butterflies up from the near continent. But you're quite right, bumblebee numbers and honeybee numbers at this point of the year are still lower than where they should be.
Gillian Handyside lives very close to Paris, so bonjour Gillian.
Oh, bit of French gudgeon.
I don't think so. There is some French in this email, actually. She says, in one of the podcasts, you spoke about the difference between hornbeam and beech. A French country friend taught me a useful saying to remember the difference, and it's a play on words. Well, I don't know how well this translates, but she has included the translation. Hornbeams have serrated edges, beeches have hairs. But when you say it aloud, it sounds like Adam's charm was that he was totally naked. We have got the French words here, but
yes.
My accent is not good enough.
And I got told off at school, Skinner, you speak French with a Norfolk accent. So that put me off for life. But
bonjour, how are you getting along together?
Je t'aime très bien, merci, Monsieur Gudgeon.
Oh, I think that sounds pretty good.
No, I don't think so. He scorned at me.
E minus.
He was the headmaster as well. Yes.
Thank you for that. Lovely to hear from France. Thank you, Gillian. Jan Moritz. The Dunnocks are at it again. Second brood on the way, possibly. I feel so privileged and honoured to witness the whole thing again. I'm still getting all the fledglings from the last brood feeding on my small patch. My question is this. Do you think they'll use the same nest or make themselves a new one?
No, almost certainly make a new nest. The old nest will have lots of feces left in from the previous brood. Although house sparrows are very good housekeepers, they will take the little droppings out from the they're not actually sparrows, they're a completely different species. When you look at house sparrows and tree sparrows, they have the seed-eating beak, whereas Dunnocks, the proper name for the hedge sparrow, has a very narrow, sharp beak as well, and they're mainly insectivorous. But brilliant to be able to watch them in close quarters. I think you live in the middle of Norwich, quite high up in one of the flats there, and you're surrounded by bird life because you take care of them.
We'll go abroad again. Dominic Allen, he listens overseas in the Isle of Wight at Ryde, one of my favourite places. So Dominic, you're very welcome. I've had a female hedgehog nesting underneath my raised shed for a month or so. She's given birth to 4 little hoglets, and they seem to be frequenting the garden on a regular basis with Mum watching on. I've been placing a regular supply of fresh water, occasionally some dried calci worm. Is this okay to do? I've read online mealworms are a no-no and have stopped leaving them out for our resident bird population.
Yes, mealworms for hedgehogs can cause quite severe diarrhoea. There's something about the composition of the worms that doesn't agree with hedgehogs, and you can have emaciated hedgehogs if you feed them with that. So calci worms are probably okay, so I'd stay with what you're doing.
Jenny Williams says, I was up close and personal with some hay bales in a field locally today. I noticed that they're tied up with lots of very un-eco plastic twine, and she has enclosed a photograph of the green-coloured threads that are holding together this hay bale. Are there any ways that farmers can bale hay efficiently with some kind of natural biodegradable fibre instead?
Yes, this is one of the areas where we've gone backwards a little bit, right through my childhood, right up until the 1970s, where many farmers were using what's called sisal twine. It's a natural product, and it was used to wrap the bales or just bale them up with little square bales, but it's not particularly strong compared to the plastic twine which superseded it. And the other thing is the bales at the bottom of the stack, if they got damp over the winter months, the strings would rot and you'd all have sort of loose bales to fork out. But it was a natural product, and we've moved away from that. And the big hay bales, we call them Hestons at the farm. They're 8 feet long by about 3 feet by 3 feet. They're pretty massive. They're held together by 5 individual strands of polypropylene string, and the round bales, you can't really use string round them because it won't hold them in. The hay is wrapped in a complete circle, and it has to be some form of netting to keep the bales together, and many farmers use that. And then on top of that, they will actually use plastic wrapping, which helps to enable you to store the bales outside if you had to, and also the bales can heat up without any harm and become haylage inside those plastic ones. But I quite agree, but many farmers keep their twine, the plastic twine, and the hay net wrapping, if they can keep it quite clean. We do have a company that visits a farm. He's been here this week. The company's name is AgriCycle, and they take all our plastic away and recycle it, which is brilliant.
Baling twine, of course, traditionally always used to keep the farmer's trousers up.
That's right, yes. I won't show you mine because there's a very tatty old leather belt down there. It's got a huge job to do.
And here's a photograph that looks a bit gruesome, actually, and it's from Andrew McLean in Watford, who regularly listens and enjoys the podcast. I run a small monthly wildlife gardening group for home-educated kids and get to include many of the insights that you share in the lesson. And Andrew attaches a photograph of a leech. He says, this is a leech that I and my 7-year-old found in a local woodland stream recently. We were impressed by its size. One end had a large sucker and the other smaller one, but we couldn't work out which was the head end. Any clues?
Well, you've got a perfect picture of what's called Pisicola geometra. It's a really unusual scientific name, but it's also known as the fish leech. And I first came across these at Dungeness, just on the coast, quite close to the Suffolk coastline. And there's some ponds there, and I was fishing for freshwater fish in there, and I was standing in the edge of the pond with my little trousers rolled up. I was only 8 years old, and I had 2 of those actually on my leg, and because I'd been wading about, it attracted them. And they're also called fish leech. They were used for medicinal purposes, and many came in from the United States, millions in bottles, just for actually applying the leeches to the skin. It was a form of medical treatment.
Was it cleansing the blood?
Yes, exactly that. They attach themselves. Now, your particular species of leech that you photographed there, that's a real conundrum because it can suck blood from either end of it. So the blunt end and the narrow end are both capable of attaching themselves mainly to fish. But I think it's George Washington that bit the dust by having rather a too liberal application of leeches. They were kept in a jar, and because he was already weakened, I think the leeches actually finished him off. So that was quite a story. It's a bit gruesome.
Well, it makes me think of the great Oscar-winning film The African Queen from so many years ago, and there was Humphrey Bogart wading through the marshes in Central Africa, and when he gets out, he's covered in leeches, and I think he uses a cigarette, to burn them off.
Cigarette is not a good idea. A very sharp fingernail if they do attach to you, or your pet. If pets go swimming in ponds, sometimes they can come out with these large leeches. They are one of the largest British species, the fish leech, and they can be about 2 inches long, 50 millimetres long. So quite amazing creatures. So there we are.
Well done, Andrew. Thanks for the photograph. And
Brilliant.
We think it's about 2 inches long, that.
Yeah, that one would be 2 inches long. It's on your hand. And if it did attach itself, which they can do quite quickly, when you get them off, it leaves a little triangular mark. The only way I can describe it, it's like the symbol on the front of a Mercedes car, that little triangle on the front of the bonnet there.
Medicinal leeches. Do you think the NHS will bring them back?
I'm
Maybe
not
it's
sure.
It's a measure that they might decide.
I'm not sure.
Emails to chris@countrysidepodcast.co.uk, and we'll look forward to some more next week, and some more sunshine and warm weather, and possibly some haymaking.
Possibly haymaking and possibly butterflies. I've been looking up and down this avenue of Himalayan balsam, looking for one of my favourite so-called demure little butterflies called the speckled wood, but it's guarding its territory, and anything that flies past gets attacked. And I've just been watching out for them. I can see lots of small whites flying about down there, a few large cabbage whites as well. Oh, another one's just joined, and a little marriage ceremony going on. So we'll do all of that next week, weather permitting.
sprung-loaded seeds and man-eating butterflies. All life is here at the High Ash Farm podcast.
And your favourite leech, Chris Skinner.
This is a Soundyard production. Music is by Tom Harris.
Hello, it's Anna and Sophie from Soundyard here. Our new service, Spoken Stories, is an incredible experience where we record the stories and voice of your loved one, which you can then hold on to forever.
It makes for an incredible gift, and anyone can make one. Take a listen to this. It beautifully captures the thoughts and feelings of life from a 6-year-old's perspective.
I'm 6 years old and I love running around. I can run very, very fast, but I'm even faster on my bike. That's why I love biking. It makes me feel energetic. And also I bike loads of places. I like doing sports like dodgeball. The people that are in charge in the world, well, I think that there should be no one in charge at all. So everyone's in charge. So there's no person that's in charge. So everyone is it's a bit more free. That's what I think. Well, what I try to change at the moment is global warming. It's when us humans litter, destroy the planet and all its nature. That's global warming. It makes me feel sad. And also, if us humans keep doing that, and that it could destroy the whole planet Earth, and then all of the human beings will be destroyed. I try to stop global warming. And also, in my coat pocket, I have a bit of Kit Kat litter I found on the floor once. I love the planet more than anything. Grown-ups should be stopping global warming, because grown-ups are more powerful than kids. But if kids can be more powerful than grown-ups, kids and grown-ups can work together and do it. Kids should be able to do the same things as grown-ups. They should have more rights. Well, I love myself because that I believe in a lot of things. That's what I love about myself. I like being a kid, but because when I'm a grown up, I'm gonna have my own kids because that's what I want. And also, I'm a bit worried to have kids, and I'm still gonna be a kid for a long, long time. So I'm glad that's actually gonna happen. I'm glad I'm gonna stay a kid for a long time. I'm gonna have kids because I want to know what it feels like to be a parent. I'm gonna be a good parent.
Isn't that just gorgeous? If you'd like to find out more about recording a spoken story of your own, or you'd like to buy this as a present for someone, take a look at our website, www.soundyard.org/spoken stories, and take advantage of our introductory offer. Alternatively, you can get in touch via email, hello@soundyard.org.
And if the internet isn't an option, You can leave a message with your details on our landline number. It's 01603 273 899, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.